Welcome to the March Western Reserve Safety Council meeting. We'll be hearing in a little bit from Beth Salisbury. She's going to talk to us about workplace violence and has got some unique perspectives on that. First of all, again, just want to remind everybody, if you have a question, either now or anytime throughout the presentation, please place that in the chat feature. We will do our very best to answer those questions all throughout or at the end of the procedure. I think Beth might even be willing to take some questions even during the presentation, which would be a cool interaction. So that'll be great. Again, want to thank our founding sponsors, Cleveland Clinic, Integrity Staffing, Nestle, North Coast Shredding, and Swagelok. Again, gold sponsors, Ving, Zerko, and Swagelok. And then in a few minutes, we'll hear from our monthly sponsors, Ving, and then also a new company, local company we're excited to hear about, Energy Focus. So we'll hear from them in a little bit. Right now, I'd like to turn it over to Dan to give us some Bwc updates. And for those of you who may not know, the Bureau of Workmen's Compensation in Ohio, they sponsor the Western Reserve Safety Council. So we've got a great partnership there. And Dan, why don't you share some updates from Bwc?
Sure, thanks, Matt. Welcome, everybody. Just want to let you know that the Ohio Safety Congress is going on right now today and tomorrow. So if you have a chance, you can still log on to some classes today and tomorrow as well. And then if you notice here up on the screen, we're still sending out masks. Just make sure that you verify your address and allow, 3 to 4 months to receive these masks. And employers won't be billed for these either. So they're going to ship out another 23 million, which will be great for these businesses. Next slide, please. This is a grant that came about improving the indoor air quality in regards to COVID. It covers improvements to indoor heating and ventilation. You can see who's eligible for these as well, mainly nursing homes and hospices and other group homes and things like that. It's a $15,000 reimbursement from the federal funds from the CARES Act. And if you notice there, the deadline to apply is June 30th. And if you have any questions or anything like that, you can certainly reach out to myself or go to the FAQ section there on the BWC's website. There's some important dates here for private employers. March 31st, your DF annual report, your EM cap requirements are due. And then if you need to change your estimated payroll exposure, you can certainly do that as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. Public employer important dates, July 30th there, application deadline. Just want to remind you about that, about your PAR enrollment, your IR program, your one claim, and your deductible program. Those are all due in July. So just make sure you can, put those in your calendar if you need it. Just about safety training requirements for bonus programs. 2019, the requirements were waived due to COVID, but again, 2020 training requirements will not be waived, so you'll have to do those. BWC monthly employment webinar. Obviously it's the 10th of March, so the first one has passed, but if you want to attend the next one on March 25th, it's a half-hour program. They're going to talk about, COVID-19 updates, BWC initiatives, and other website resources there. So I encourage you to look that up and try to attend if you can. It's only about 30 minutes. There's some other safety webinars here that we're hosting. Accident analysis, there's March 16th and the 23rd. Confined spaces on March 9th. And, these are all classes that you can certainly attend. The virtual training, there's a number of classes here throughout the month of March. The next one will be measuring safety performance. That'll be a 2-day course. We have the HAZWOPER, electrical safety maintenance. So if any of these things apply to you, you can certainly register for these and attend these courses. So they're free of charge. Our consult, again, this has been going on for a while. Our on-site visits are still currently suspended, but if you still need assistance from us, you talk to me by phone or email, or anybody throughout the state, depending on where you're at, for help there. COVID-19 resources, we still have those on the website through ODH and the BWC. If you have any other further questions, you can certainly contact myself, like I mentioned. And again, the Safety Congress is going on, so I encourage, if you have the time, to attend and see what might help you out. Thanks again. I'll turn it back to Matt.
Hey, thanks, Dan. Yeah, a lot of great resources through the BWC. Please take advantage of those. And then again, Dan, thank you for your support there. So again, thank you to our founding sponsors. We mentioned them, and the gold sponsors. If you would like to sponsor at a higher level, please reach out to Tom or Kaylin on that. Some great local companies with great products, great resources, great individuals. So right now we're going to actually turn it over to Ving to either play the video or if they want to say something. So again, Ving is one of our monthly sponsors. Don't have audio, Tom.
1 terrible, 10 awesome. Now ask, did they get, read, watch, listen, and understand?
No audio still?
It did turn on, so why don't you start it over?
All right, here we go. I was muted. There we go.
Your employees need accurate information to deliver quality work efficiently and without injury. How good are you at sharing the right information at the right time with them? Rank yourself 1 terrible, 10 awesome. Now ask, did they get, read, watch, listen, and understand? Don't like your numbers? Introducing Bing, a learning experience platform that's perfect for modern-day microburst information sharing, short videos, minimal text, and relevant material. We'll help get your organization to a 10. Contact us today.
All right, certainly want to thank Ving for their regular sponsorship. They offer a really cool product, so take advantage of that. Very excited to have Energy Focus as a new monthly sponsor, and I want to turn it over to actually, I think we're going to watch the video first, and then Jim is going to have a few comments from Energy Focus. But again, welcome.
Okay, if you can hear me, I'll get right into what I'd like to say. Energy Focus right here in Solon, Ohio, is the leading manufacturer in LED lighting. And to really grasp that, you have to understand 10-year warranty. A 10-year warranty, no questions asked on our lamps. You put them in the ceiling and you forget them. There is absolutely innovation going on here all the time with our LED. The neatest thing going right now in the LED market is to be able to color tune, which is go from the yellow to the bright white, and dim down your lighting, which is what's above you. You know, we're indoors 90% of the time, and to be able to do that with just replacing the switch on the wall. So it's a room-based and energy focus based room-based control system that does the color tuning and the dimming. It's a huge capability, very inexpensive, and you don't have to have an IT degree to put it in. You'll love it. Our whole office right here in Solon, if anyone wants to get a hold of me about that, I'd be happy to bring them through and show it to them. We can even do a demo setup at your office or building. You'll love it. But the product we're launching now, which maybe you saw briefly in the video, was the UVC products. We are taking on COVID head on. I'd like to do more on this, but I know we've got Beth on standby. So we're launching the MOVE program, which is a robot and a technician that comes around to the different Solon businesses and within 30-minute radius of Solon, Ohio. So all the way to Cleveland, all the way up north towards Menor, you know, east, west, everywhere, Akron. And it's disinfecting to put customers back in your business and make everyone feel more comfortable. If you want, we'll do a lot more information on UVC. But let's just say that UVC prevents the spread of all viruses, molds, bacteria, by breaking the bonds so that it can't replicate. So we're winning the battle, and we're ready to launch this month. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Jim. Again, if any of Energy Focus's businesses or the resources that they have fit your needs, certainly reach out to them. Before we turn it over to Beth, got the motto of the month. So the motto of the month is very simple: hope springs eternal. And if you can see what I'm wearing today, for you baseball fans, you'll understand that. But really just kind of a word of encouragement with all we've gone through about a year into the COVID restrictions. Maybe you've had some challenges via that, or in our case, we've had a couple safety incidents here at the factory that have challenged us a little bit. But remember to stay positive, focus in on what you can do, be creative in some of your solutions. Hope does spring eternal. So the change of seasons is a great reminder for us that we can persevere, we can continue on. Tough times don't last, but tough people do. So just encourage you in your efforts to help people work safe, live healthy, protect the environment, that you play a key role. So be encouraged in that. Again, hope springs eternal should encourage all of us. Right now, very excited to turn it over to Beth Salisbury. You see the slide up there. A fantastic amount of experience. Beth, first and foremost, thank you for your service to us as well in the U.S. Army. That's fantastic. Want to turn it over to you to share with us your experiences on workplace violence. Welcome, Beth.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks for inviting me. I am part of the Preble County Safety Council out here in Eaton, Ohio. So when folks ask me to kind of speak, I do so, but I may come steal some of your speakers someday. So Tom, Kaylin, Matt, and Barb, all the people on the website, thank you so much on this Zoom call for inviting me. Just as a disclaimer, this is my personal opinion in this slide deck, not of the military and things that I talk about in here. Although many of the improvements that we did during this workplace violence incident throughout the military, these are my own personal experiences just being a commander. So I'll set the stage a little bit before we see the video. In 2000, I've deployed 4 times overseas in deployments. One of the deployments I was on was a commander of a combat stress control company. So I tell people to visualize that like it's an outpatient behavioral health clinic where soldiers can come and get assistance and provide care for those folks for everyday things. People go in and get counseling every day or every month with a local counselor, and they can continue to do that in an overseas environment. And then we also get into when we're doing care with folks overseas, sometimes people have serious issues in which we have to deal with from a behavioral health standpoint. Some people eventually end up leaving the theater during a combat environment, but we also deal with those folks who may have experienced someone whose death or who has died or had a serious accident from a combat related incident. And we intervene and help with those units that are in those situations. So we had 10 clinics throughout all of Iraq during this time frame that were spread through every location you could probably imagine, in which soldiers, if they wanted to seek care or just get guidance or counseling, they could do so. And that was our job. Sometimes they would actually stay with us for a 2 or 3 day intensive program where they could get care, learn some skills, and then we put them back in their workplaces. So as we talk about this workplace violence incident, I'm going to let, I tell everybody, if there's questions as we go along, please put them in the chat. And if one of you guys, Tom or Matt, or one of you guys could kind of, or Kaylin can, or Barb can kind of cue me that there's something in there as we go. Please feel free to ask questions or intervene during this talk, because I want it to be interactive and just not me kind of lecturing to you guys. But I'll have to set the stage, I guess, with the video, if you don't mind, someone, if they can key that up.
The military is releasing a little more information on the soldier charged with killing 5 fellow soldiers at this facility at Camp Liberty in Baghdad. He's Army Sergeant John Russell of the 54th Engineer Battalion based in Bamberg, Germany. Officials say this was probably his 3rd tour in Iraq, and add he had been referred to the military counseling clinic by his superiors, presumably because of concern over his mental state. Military officials also note that he was due to leave soon. He's now facing 5 murder charges and 1 count of aggravated assault. None of the victims has been named. However, we do now know that 2 were officers from the 55th Medical Company, a reserve unit from Indianapolis. The others were enlisted personnel seeking treatment at the clinic. The Pentagon official says the alleged assailant had been escorted to the clinic, but once inside got into an argument with the staff and was asked to leave. After he and his escort drove away, Russell allegedly took control of the escort's weapon and returned to the clinic. Beyond that, officials gave few other details, saying the investigation is ongoing and adding that there were conflicting accounts of what happened. The military says it's also examining whether the Army has enough mental health facilities in Iraq to care for stress cases. Diane Kepley, The Associated Press.
When school isn't a place you have to be.
So as we talk through that, if you don't mind, then I'm going to share the slide deck, if that's okay with you guys, to kind of walk through the slides. Make sure you guys can see them. Can you all see those out there?
Yes, Beth, we're good.
Okay, so I kind of the outline we're going to follow, and then I'm going to ask you guys the first question. We can go through that first. Oh, you guys will need the control of the screen. I need to do the questioning. My bad. So I'm going to stop sharing and let's do the poll first, because I want, and then I'll kind of lead more into kind of what we're going to talk about. So the first one is my company. I want you to ask yourselves, is my company prepared for workplace violence incident? From folks out there in the room.
Beth, are you able to see the results that are tallying for the poll?
I am.
Perfect. Okay, just want to make sure. Awesome.
Yep. So there's a few more folks that may not have provided feedback yet. Okay. So as we talk about that, I think there's a group of folks who said yes, they're prepared for workplace violence, those that say they're not, and then some folks who are unsure. And as we go through this talk, we'll kind of talk about different things that as an employer, you may or may want to do. There were times we thought we were ready for about anything during this incident. So as you watch the video and we talk through this, I want you to kind of think about things that you might be able to implement within your employment or your workplace, or things that you know or you already do that are really good that certainly as we go along, feel free to share in the chat, because I'm certainly not an expert. It's just my own personal experience doing this and how we made improvements and what I recommend to employers as we move through workplace violence. So I'm going to share my screen again so we can kind of get back to kind of what we're going to talk about. So this is the actual outline that we have are going to kind of follow. Let's see if I can get it to move. So Sergeant Russell was a soldier that got brought into our facility at another location over by the Baghdad airport and was seen by a behavioral health person there. And he had some struggles. He was under investigation for sexual harassment of a fellow soldier. And when he did that, he was in some distress from that because he had a lot of time in the military and they were looking at putting him out. So oftentimes we do get soldiers that come in that are under investigation or get into some kind of trouble, and we provide support for them when they come in. So he was then referred to some of our providers over at the other, what's called the Liberty location, in which he came in and got care from some of our folks. He was going to be put out of the military, and in that respect, when he came in, he was not happy to know that he was going to be put out of the military, and he got very combative within our facility. They calmed him down, walked him outside. And as you heard from the media, there was a different spin, and we'll talk about the media later on when we get through these slide decks. But he was escorted back to his unit. His weapon had been taken away because they thought he might kill himself, or the providers thought he might have killed himself. But on his way back, the young gentleman who drove him back and forth from one location to the other, once he got back to his location, which was about 30 minutes away, he had taken this young soldier's weapon and told him to get out of the vehicle. And he drove back to our location, kind of cased our facility. He kind of knew where the soldiers, they had a smoke pit where outside soldiers like to hang out and things like that. And he had went around the backside and came in the backside of the facility and had shot several of our people, or had attempted to shoot several. He killed 5 folks, 2 of our providers, along with 3 patients who were currently in the facility, and then there were 30 other folks in our building that day that escaped out through a window, out through a door, or ran for their lives somewhere. So, and hid. So we'll talk about run, hide, and fight. We had folks that ran. We had other people that hid, and then we had other people that tried to fight Sergeant John Russell as he came through the facility. We'll kind of talk about that a little bit at the end. I tell people, I'm not going to read to you all, but here's the definition of what OSHA claims as workplace violence. And I tell people this is a good frame of reference to start with if you have a policy in place that defines what workplace violence is. But I tell people there are many different things that are considered workplace violence. There's verbal abuse that people start out with, that they intimidate people work with in your workplace that may occur. Also physical violence. There are people who physically assault each other in the workplace and intend to provide harm. And then you get into people who harass people for one reason or another. And these slides, I think they're going to post on you guys' website when we're done. And there's talking points in the bottom of these slides that you guys can steal definitions from. If you're planning on using a policy, and we'll talk about what you guys should do in that process. Also bullying, oftentimes the history has showed that, as you know, for most of the school systems, when they have shootings in the school systems, there's a good percentage of those that started out with a bullying situation that escalated into either physical violence and verbal abuse, and then the ultimate, of killing folks in the school systems. And these are definitions that I tell people is important to know, or people that intimidate other people, on top of that in the workplace. And I tell people oftentimes there's a precursor of leading up of bullying or verbal abuse that ends up into a situation where we end up in workplace violence. In the OSHA regulation, I only bring this up because, as you all know, the general duty clause says that we have a right, that all employees have a right to a safe workplace, and that law requires that employers provide some kind of safe environment for their employees, and prohibits employers from retaliating against employees for exercising that right. And I tell people, as you go through a policy or procedure, we are required really to protect our employees, and doing workplace violence policies and procedures is one of those. And OSHA does believe that to be true. So there's a lot of statistics, and it's hard to gather statistics out there because the Bureau of Labor and Statistics are older statistics and not current. But I tell people 20,890 workers have experienced some kind of trauma that's non-fatal in the workplace. And that can be the list of things I talked about, like physical intimidation, verbal intimidation, bullying, and things like that. Oftentimes it's females aged 25 to 54, and it's usually in the healthcare, education, and social assistance industry. I tell people to note for us here in Ohio is that 20% of those folks required 31 more days away from work to recover from that. Some only just had a few days, they just wanted off work after they were involved in some workplace incident, but there is a good percentage out there through the United States who needed a lot more time away from work. And how that looks for you guys as employers when you have somebody that may end up in that situation. But fatalities, although it doesn't seem like a lot, when it happens, it's usually in groups, meaning workplace violence usually has someone entering your facility, and they don't just kill one person. People who are innocent bystanders become part of that. But usually I tell people workplace violence is usually oftentimes targeted at females, but when it gets escalated, it's usually involves males. And the statistics that are sitting there. And most of those are sales and related occupations or people who work in protective services. So there's a lot of statistics you can go grab out there. I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of what those numbers are. And even though that doesn't look like very many, when it happens in your facility, it's a significant event. And often people forget about that when all they see is 841 folks. I tell people approximately 25% of the companies are unprepared for active shooter. And if you looked at our poll, I would say that you all fit in that same category. Workplace violence is a culture of violence that is in American society. We see it all over the media. This was the Walmart incident in the picture on the left in El Paso, in which some people came to the aid of those folks who came through the Walmart facility. I tell people nearly 2 million American workers report being victims of workplace violence each year. And that can be simple as verbal altercations with folks up to physical intimidation and physicalness that happens. And on average, 20 workers are murdered and 18,000 assaults are that they incur. Although 40% of the murder victims were related or acquainted with their assailants, most people didn't know. Oftentimes those are disgruntled workers or clients of domestic violence. And I talk to employers that oftentimes domestic violence spills over into the workplace. If you look at a lot of the major events that have happened across the US, there's some workplace violence or someone ends up in a divorce situation and that employee or the spouse of that employee comes in and gets into a workplace violence incident with people in the workplace. And also disgruntled workers, and we'll talk about disgruntled workers in a minute. When you terminate disgruntled employees, things that you should do, and don't let me forget to talk about that if I forget as we talk through this workplace violence video or presentation. There are a lot of barriers people have for doing policies and procedures. Some corporations think, oh, that will never happen here. I never in a million years thought I'd have somebody come through my facility ever, because we did a great job of getting soldiers and those with behavioral health issues back to work. We had a 98% return to duty rate for our people that came in. So for me, it was obviously shocking, but had never thought for a minute that someone would come through our facility because we were helping people. Also, program development time. Oftentimes, the people who are asked to build workplace violence policies and procedures are already overwhelmed with millions of other things that they're doing in the workplace. And they usually harbors on the HR person or the safety person that's sitting out there on this briefing. Also, some people have lack of awareness. Bear with me a second. Where folks aren't aware of what to do or where to even start. And then communication and training. Oftentimes people have this misconception, if we bring up workplace violence, then we might be encouraging folks to do that. And we find that that is really not the case, that oftentimes people do want to talk about it and it is occurring in your workplace. And I think some employers are afraid to ask that question because they might get more information about, verbal altercations or physical altercations that are going on that you don't even know about. We'll talk about also employee reporting is very important because employees sometimes think that their employers don't follow up on that. And what happens if you don't follow up on a workplace violence incident? And we'll talk about those things as we move forward. I tell people just start somewhere. Start with something basic. And we're going to talk about what those places of where to start are. Do something. Because being a survival of this workplace violence incident myself, I would say I just encourage people no matter where I go to do something. That's why I'm talking to you guys. I spoke at the Ohio Safety Congress and I've talked at other safety councils because I think this is important and to share that information with all of you. Okay, so interactive question next. Can you take control for a minute? Or do I need to stop sharing? Okay. Do you feel your organization has an effective workplace violence policy or procedure? So as we're looking at those answers, I don't know if you all can see them, but I would say, you know, a third of those folks have yes, that they feel like they have effective policy procedure. There's a good percentage that say no, and then there's some folks that are unsure. So as we talk through those things, we're going to kind of talk next about that. So let's see if I can take back control. So here's the must I tell people as you go through a policy and procedure, the things that you must have. And I think these are very important. Define what workplace violence is. And if you don't have a definition, go back to those first slides in the notes pages and at least put definitions of prohibitive action. One, you define what workplace violence is by the slide that Osha has and the definitions that we have in this slide deck. And then tell them what are prohibitive actions, because often I find people define what workplace violence is, but they don't define to their employees what you're not allowed to do. You know, like verbal altercations with people or verbal intimidation, bullying, physical intimidation. What does that look like in terms of defining to your employees? I tell people make sure it's in the handbook and that during orientation of your new employees and annually that you define what those are and remind folks. And forms. And what I mean by that is if you find someone is doing something that you have a form to counsel those employees, just like you do anything else. When they have a safety violation, you write them up for that, or you have you talk to them about that. Anytime that you encounter that with an employee, that you actually physically put it in writing, it protects you from liability. It protects the organization from liability. It reinforces to that employee of things you will not tolerate. And I tell folks forms are important to store in their personnel files and things like that. Most of the time I tell employees, usually you find that those incidents occur either verbal or physical altercations because there's some kind of stressor in their life. So obviously the gentleman who came through our facility had some significant stressors, right? He was being put out of the military. He was probably going to have a dishonorable discharge. He was facing some pretty stiff he was going to lose his retirement. They were going to bust him down in rank. So he was facing some significant stressors that probably, like anybody else that has been involved in some kind of incident such as this, and that he was seeking assistance and some protection from those situations. And I tell people when you do counsel those folks is that you integrate them into an employee assistance program. And oftentimes those things resolve themselves, meaning the employee gets some help for some stressor, whether it's workplace violence in the workplace itself, whether there's something going on in the home environment, they have stress in terms of financial stressors or whatever that may be. But as you guys build a policy, ensure that you put that in there. We do employee assistance for many other things. And this is one of them. We certainly want to do that because, most of the time employees are just stressed out. And if they feel like they've been hurt or get assistance, oftentimes those issues resolve themselves. The other thing I tell people is whoever files that workplace incident issue that we report to them, we follow up with them, we close the loop with those employees who have filed a workplace violence complaint about another employee so that they know we're doing something about it. Because it is vitally important that we do that. We close the loop with them, make sure they understand what you're doing about it. And also trending tracking. I think during that annual meeting that you have with your employees when you do an annual safety meeting or whatever that looks like, or an annual employee meeting or quarterly, is that you show trends to those folks, although they don't have names and faces to those trend tracking, but that you say, hey, we had 5 people, verbally assault each other or get into a bullying situation. Oftentimes through social media, you'll see that out there. There's tons of social media out there that has information about bullying, and tracking those trends and educating your employees on what right looks like in terms of not getting into some kind of workplace violence incident. And then prevention strategies. So I talk about the people part of hiring people, all the HR people out there. As you're hiring people, there are things that you should do. One, do background checks on people. Make sure that you know about them, actually call their references and actually interview people. It's amazing how many folks out there know more about this, about these employees that you're hiring. And I know there are times people are very desperate to get employees out on their floor because you have product you have to get out the door. But I tell people your number one priority really is prevention of this kind of incident, is hiring the right people in your jobs, staying away from those folks who have been probably terminated multiple times for many reasons. And oftentimes there's history previously. So I'll give you an example. The gentleman that came into our facility had 2 previous incidents of sexual harassment that were dealt with previously. So this was his 3rd time around. And until you dig into the details, you realize some of those folks have had a long history. He had been busted down before and ranked for that in the military, and had several histories of this kind of behavior that ended up into a bigger issue. Also, understanding your work environment. Oftentimes, the biggest altercations come between an employee and a supervisor. And that you should sit down and counsel both folks when they end up into some kind of altercation with each other. Having a policy that is very clear cut, and counseling. So you can't pick and choose counseling folks, that you need to counsel everybody who has an incident in this process. And then doing education and training. The last thing is really talking about crisis action planning. And we'll talk about how do you do a crisis action situation? How do we practice that? And we'll talk about that here in a minute. Are there any questions before we get too much further, or comments? Anybody out there? Okay, you're all quiet today. Some other prevention strategies I tell people, I work on site with employers day in and day out. And as I walk around, and I can talk about the facility that we had, some safety issues that we had with our own facility. One, this person had already knew our facility. He knew that soldiers went out back to smoke cigarettes. We all have smoke pits somewhere within our facilities, unless you're a smoke-free workplace. As I walk around employers every day, I go in and out of employers for what I do in my civilian job as an OT. I find doors popped open, garage doors open, that when people are delivering or getting things delivered through the shipping and receiving. Oftentimes I tell people, close access points if you want to do any prevention for yourself. And that makes it really hard, because people like to put rocks in front of the doors, or, prop doors open, especially if it's a warm facility. They like to let air come in and out. I tell people, walk around your facility today and see if you can find areas in which someone, if they wanted to be creative, could walk in your facility. There are many facilities I walk in every day and nobody asks me anything as I go on site to those employers. And they too can access your facilities very easily, depending on how secure your locations are. I tell people cipher locks are important. Making sure you fix and maintain repairs. So our building had cipher locks on the outside. You couldn't get into the building without a cipher lock. There was kind of a control point that you accessed our facility. There was a window. You couldn't get too much further into our facility unless you got through the second door, which most employers have nowadays. But we had cipher locks that were broken. We had put in for repairs for them, and they were not repaired because it was something low on the list. When you're in a combat zone, people don't worry about cipher locks. You're worried about many other things besides that. Also, maintenance repairs is that lights are on. People know how to fix those things, and because lights kind of keep bad people away. Cameras, security cameras outside and inside your facilities, so you can see where people are, how they access your facilities in your parking lots and things like that. Also, physical separation, like we talked. Is there a window or where you have visitors or contractors that come in? Is making sure you physically separate folks. And also security devices or cards. Most of the time when I go into facilities, I have a little key fob or some kind of key card that lets me get into your facilities. I tell people, knowing your contractors too, you'd be surprised the number of contractors who have bad histories somewhere prior to working in your facility or on site. Is making sure you either have escorted services for those contractors, or there's some vetting of contractors prior to them coming on site. There has been a history of contractors getting into altercations with your employees on the floor. Also, picture IDs. I tell folks, pictures say 1,000 words. I had an employer who fired an employee about a year ago. He still had his picture ID. He accessed the facility, but someone on the floor had known he had been terminated. He came in to get into an altercation with another employee, thinking that that employee had gotten him fired. So I tell people, as you terminate folks, that you take any access that you can. and make sure they turn in all of their things that you own from a security standpoint. Having silent alarms and panic buttons, especially for those who work out in the sales industry, making sure they work. And then a communication system. So I tell people, there was a day gone by where we would say in workplace violence that that you had codes, like blue code is someone, needs medical assistance, or red code is that someone's in your facility. I tell people on your communication system, if you have somebody come through your facility that is a threat, you just tell everybody, this is a workplace violence incident, everybody get out now. I mean, there's no sense in trying to code it because people get confused and forget what color or sound or whatever that may be. Use your communication systems to evacuate your folks out of your facilities. I tell people, like we talked about first, when we look at incidents or complaints, it is serious business. You'll want to discipline your folks if they have done it, writing them up, doing prompt response, investigating it, because there's always two sides to the story, as you all know, who get into other situations with employees and workers out on the floor. I tell people, make sure you're investigating it. You look at both sides. Maybe both people need counseling in your employee assistance program if it's a supervisor and an employee. And then also providing support. There are a lot of people out there who are struggling. COVID has not made life easy for all of us. And on top of that, that we want to have that support out there to help them get to a better person of themselves, I call it. Also terminating smartly. I tell people, when you terminate, I know many people out there may have already had the police come and sit in their parking lot, or actually physically come into their facility when they're terminating somebody that they may consider at risk. I always tell people, when you're terminating somebody, if you're the HR person, that there's somebody in the room with you, or a couple people down the hall, if you think this person may become physically into a physical altercation with you. And oftentimes maybe the police come and just escort that person out, tell them, they're not to come back here. If they come back here, they're going to be brought up on charges. I mean, sometimes that's where you have to go with some of those things. I just tell people, be very careful as you terminate people. And I don't know how many people out there have had some kind of incident with an employee. And if you've been in business long enough, you probably had somebody who you just were uneasy about when you terminated them. We talked about the employee assistance program. It is important. Also doing fit for duties in your employee assistance program from a behavioral health standpoint. Oftentimes we do fit for duties for physical ailments. I tell employers sometimes it's important to do a fit for duty for a behavioral health issue someone has. Are they okay to come back at this point? Are they safe? Are they still angry? Those are things that you too should do for a fit for duty as you bring your employees back that may have some behavioral health issues. And helping find community resources. There are tons of resources out there in the community. You just have to reach out to get them. Your employee may be homeless or have financial issues, and there's lots of financial resources out there for employees that might be having issues. Most of the people are hooked to your Chamber of Commerce. So when you're hooked to the Chamber of Commerce, oftentimes there's great resources out there for you to find those folks who might be able to help your employee who might be struggling with one reason or another of something. Okay, so I think we're into another question. Or our polling, if you don't mind. I think I already gave you the answer to this one anyway. So as you guys go through these questions, workplace violence occurs between employees. Oftentimes it does. There is a percentage of folks who that person doesn't even know your employment. They're angry, they walk through there, they just come into your facility out of the blue and have no connection with you whatsoever. And often that happens in the sales, someone that's in a gas station or something like that. Most workplace violence in factories are usually between employees, but more often it's between the supervisor and an employee. And I call them employees, but as you guys are looking at your folks, there are trends with certain supervisors. And when you start seeing trends with supervisors that may have had altercations with multiple people, I tell people it's important to make sure that you deal with those supervisors. I had an employee who had a supervisor who was constantly into some kind of verbal or sometimes physical altercation with an employee. Everybody knew who that supervisor was. They could clearly tell you about this supervisor, and it was in all aspects of work. So I tell people be very careful as you promote folks within your organizations to know their history, and then to act upon it. And oftentimes employees didn't want to do anything with the supervisor because they thought the supervisor was protected from senior management. At some point, when you have something like that, I tell people it's important to counsel those supervisors, and if need be, supervisors sometimes need to be terminated too. It just makes it very challenging. As we go through training, I tell people supervisor training is important. Conflict resolution, there's a lot of nonviolence response. So in our facility, we had conflict resolution classes that everybody had to do. In medical, that happens quite often, nonviolent response. And what does that look like when a supervisor might get into a conflict with an employee out on the floor so that it doesn't escalate into a physical altercation. Also taking supervisor action, what that supervisor needs to do. And that means coming up to the HR folks and really talking to you in the HR side of the house when they feel an employee is getting into a workplace violence concern. And also compassion skills. Oftentimes, if employees aren't showing up to work timely or coming in late all the time or leaving early or having something happen, is helping supervisors be compassionate with those folks goes a long way in deconflicting or getting into a nonviolent or de-escalating a situation. And then discipline. And then those supervisors knowing where they need to go during a crisis or emergency, because those are the supervisors out there that know their folks on the floor. They should know where they need to go in an emergency, or if there's a crisis out on the floor, what do they do about that, so that they don't become a victim of violence in the workplace, or they're protecting their employees out there on the floor. So I tell people you may need to do a separate supervisors training about that, different from your employees, to just make sure that they understand their roles in de-escalation, and also if there was an actual incident out on the floor. Also employee training. This is probably one of the most important things as you hire people in. We talked a little bit as making sure they understand the employee handbook. If you have a handbook of what the company policy, what you will not tolerate, what gets people terminated, and also what to deal with if you have a hostile coworker who might be out there on the floor. What do you do with that information? I tell people all the time, we do a lot of safety classes that are around the physical things that might get us hurt at work, that we often should focus most of our time on classes that get after those non-physical things that get us hurt at work, which is anger management, stress management, wellness. I think it was really good. You guys at the beginning of your safety council meeting did a little coaching and taking care of yourselves from a wellness standpoint. We should do that with our employees and supervisors out on the floor. Also training employees on conflict resolution, like when you have an aggressive coworker or someone who might be a domineering person in the workplace, how do you deal with those folks? And then also educating them on security procedures if they're involved in that situation, or someone from the outside might come into the facility and threaten them. And also for their own personal security and safety, walking in parking lots. Oftentimes physical altercations happen in the parking lot. At an employer in Dayton that I worked with, and they were not allowed to fight on the workplace. They had a workplace violence policy. So when they'd leave work, they'd drive out of the parking lot and they go across the street to the bar next door, and they'd get into a physical fight with each other after they would leave those facilities. So I tell people, be very clear what that means is, even if it's on property or off property, if two employees get into it somewhere else, that there is something that we're going to do about that, because people forget how creative people can be, and if they really want to fight with each other, they'll find a way to make that happen and get into it with each other. And also how to access employee assistance programs anonymously, is that where they can reach out to get assistance moving forward. Okay, so let's take a breather for a second. Are there any comments out there in the chat? Any questions up to this point? Because what we're going to move into next is, when an incident occurs at your workplace, what do you do? No questions, Tom? Okay. So as we talk about what do you do, never in a million years did I think I would ever have something like this happen in my workplace or be a victim of it myself. And I tell people, I want you to kind of think today as you're working, what if this happened in my place today? What would I do? Do I have all the right places, all the things in place? Or do my people really know what to do? You know, how do I try and protect them more? Because, you know, after something happens, we talk about, I'll kind of talk about it. So here's another poll. I want you to answer, I've been a victim of workplace violence, knowing what we defined at the beginning. So if someone can run the poll for me, please. So I want you to kind of be honest. Have you been? Have you not been? You're not sure. So there's been some folks out there who have been under workplace violence. And I tell them that's everything from bullying to someone being verbally abusive, physically intimidating. And it doesn't have to be, you know, physically beating you up or, you know, obviously been a victim of that. It's surprising the number of folks, we have 31% of folks that said they have been a victim of workplace violence. It's a significant amount out there that people either don't tell people because they're ashamed that someone did something to them, or they did not, you know, they try to do something about it, but the employer didn't do anything about it. Or you may still feel threatened today. I just tell people as you go through this, I want you to think about your employees and even yourself and your situation of, you know, what can I do with that information? Or if you're currently being bullied or in an intimidation situation, making sure that you go back and do something about it before you become into something bigger. I tell people when you get into workplace violence, the initial part is startle and fear that happen. And right before the incident in our facility, there was a lot of confusion that went on. We had an incident with him where he was being escorted back to his facility. They thought that's back to his unit where he was going to be, you know, continued to be monitored by his unit itself. We had no idea that he had taken a weapon from somebody, but we did, because what happened is one of the people over at the location that he was at or going back to called and said, hey, this soldier had grabbed a weapon from somebody else. They thought he was going somewhere to kill himself by himself. They had no idea that he had gotten into the car, left, and was on his way back to our facility. And so our folks were trying to figure out where he might have been, if he was going to kill himself and things like that. So the unit was running around trying to find him in his living location, where he might have gone and hid, places he went and hung out, just to see if they could find where he was. No one really thought for a minute that he had come back to our facility and was going to walk in our door. And so I tell people, you know, I call it the fog of battle, or oftentimes we hear that. I tell people, you know, that's kind of where we were. And I tell people, our folks, although we're trained in de-escalation, what to do in the incident, they're all medical professionals who get trained in this prior because of the nature of what we do from a behavioral health standpoint. And so there was some trained response that we had from people. And then we had untrained response where there were our patients, right? We didn't think about customers that came in our door. Of none of them were really trained in any incident like this because they were our clients that came in. So I tell people, making sure that not only your employees understand what to do in a violence situation, but also your contractors and things like that, is helping them understand what that looks like. For most of my employers, I work with them all the time, so I know kind of their processes, but there are times I walk into somebody else's door every day and I don't know them, they don't know me very well, and not having a response or understanding that response. I tell people it's very important to have emergency procedures, and all of you probably have those for everything within your facility: fire, emergency, things like that. Protection. I tell people run, hide, and fight. Like I think I talked to you guys about, we had people who ran out the door immediately to find a safe place to hide. Outside to get away. We had people that were hiding after the incident and after he came through our building. We still found people hiding in cupboards, under beds, under desks, places where they could hide and get away. We also had a couple employees who they got out windows, things like that. We also had employees who tried to de-escalate him and get his weapon from him. One of those folks lost his life doing that. The other soldier tried to get him to put his weapon down, and when he realized he wasn't going to do it, he got under his desk, got shot at by under his desk, and then he thought he had killed this another employee of mine, and then he went outside. Having rally points. So all of our people, we did have a rally point for everything. Anytime when you're in a combat environment, if you get mortared or something else, there's a rally point where everybody goes to. So they all kind of rallied at this location. Accountability. So I tell people, figuring out who was not in the building, where everybody went. So I knew what employees were in the facility that day. So I had a list of who was working in that day. So those are things as an HR person, it's probably good to have, or a plant manager or supervisor or owner. Also, people who had signed in who were patients that day. So we had a sign-in log at the front. Some people have electronic sign-in logs. Some people use swipes to kind of count themselves in. I tell people, whatever that is, make sure you have access to those so that you can account for people in an incident. So it did not take very long for us to figure out who had been killed or who probably was involved and had been killed in the incident. As soon as our incident happened, we had some police that were in a building behind us. They came and secured the building. They wouldn't let anybody in for evidence purposes. And that's things that will happen to you too if you end up in one of these situations. And then also hazmat at the end. I tell people that we were not allowed in that building until it went to trial, and he was charged with murder. So we could not get back into our facility. We had to build a whole new facility to take care of folks. And my boss told me, you have 5 days to get another facility up and running despite everything that happened, because your business continues and you can't totally shut down your building and your business. And what does that look like for cleaning your facilities and knowing what that looks like? The aftermath. I tell people, the biggest thing in the aftermath is really owner and management and union presence. Is that if you look at any of the people who've been successful in managing the optics of a situation, or I call the news media spiel, is making sure that wherever those folks are, that they're standing out front and presence. If anybody knew about the school shooting in Richmond, Indiana, about 1.5 years ago, they did a very good job, and school systems get trained in this quite a bit, is making sure that there is a face immediately, because the media will come and they come quickly. Even in our combat environment, I had ABC News, the Associated Press, everybody who wanted to comment on the news media out there. And oh, by the way, it went like wildfire. I tell people the news crews showed up at my house here back in the United States to talk to my husband. I mean, things that happen that you don't think about. So when you do that, is that you're all on the same page and you have the same message. I tell people it's important to have the police right there with you, or someone from the media, so that they can help you. The police are used to talking to the media. They know what to say and not what to say, and things like that. And they can give you guidance and direction. Also employee communication. I tell people is sometimes if you have one of these incidents that you're communicating with your employees, that you have a location where you sit and talk to them about what happened and everything. It may not be in your facility, meaning find a local community center or a library or somewhere where you can rent some space to talk to your employees in the event of an aftermath. I spent a lot of time communicating with not only my employees in our location there, but we had 10 other locations where we rotated people around, and they knew some of the people that had been killed in our incident, and making sure that we communicate with them and then their families back home. And what does that look like? And communication with family members. Having crisis response personnel there, being behavioral health people, we were always helping other people with a death. We then had to ourselves get assistance from what are called critical incident stress debriefers. The police use these folks all the time. And I would reach out to some of those community behavioral health resources to help you all get through the crisis. And then we get into crime situations, right? Because as everything that was in that facility became evidence, interviewing of your employees, incidents that may happen, people have to testify, handling crime information and crime scenes become vitally important, where you may not have access to your facility. So I tell people, how are you going to continue to build business and do business if you can't get into your facility, or they may let you into half of your facility, part of your facility, or none at all? How do you get your work back up and running? What do you do with that stuff? I also tell people the healing value of work. I was very unhappy with my supervisor when he told me I had 5 days to get a facility up and running after I just lost 5 people, and people were still upset and bereaved and traumatized. We found another building. We got it up and running as a temporary facility, telling my employees, hey, we got to come back. But I will tell you, that was probably the best advice, although I was not really happy about it at the time, to kind of get people back to work and get back to normalcy a little bit as best you can in some kind of incident like that. Also talking to families. I spent a lot of time talking to the families of these soldiers and soldiers who came into our facilities. And then community resources. I tell people, even in a wartime environment, we do have community resources around us to help us too. Finding those for you in your own hometowns where you live, people who are out there to help you. All the people that are on this call right now helping each other from the Safety Council, right? You'll be surprised how many people kind of who those resources might be that you don't even know about. So I tell people, learn about the resources in your community so that you know when you need them, you know about them before you need them. And that's vitally important. Other things, I tell people when you're talking to the media, the first words you use are usually your last words. So if you've seen oftentimes in the news when there's some kind of murder out there or something, the words that get used by the media sometimes become spun or are cut out. Or so I'll tell you what happened to us. So that video clip you all saw was a picture of me in our facility. ABC News had come out the week before this incident that never got put out in the news media at all. But the pictures that you saw in there were of me being interviewed by ABC News about the great things that we were doing for behavioral health soldiers throughout the battlefield and what a great program we had, how it was benefiting all kinds of people. And it was supposed to be published that Friday on ABC News as a news story with Martha Raddatz. When our incident happened, I emailed Martha and I said, I'm asking you personally for myself, if you can please squat and not do anything with that information. And the news media was very gracious at that moment because they had tons of pictures of our facility. They had interviewed some of the people that had been killed the week before, and they were very gracious to us. So I tell people, if you don't have a public affairs officer, which is what PAO is, that you use those folks for that. That you find someone to help you with the news media and approach, and having a united approach in your messaging, not only from the company, but if you're hooked to a corporate office, that you do that also. How much time do I have? I don't have much time left, do I? 2 minutes. Okay. Yeah. Also evidence and keeping a log of everything that goes on, keeping a log when you're in the middle of it. Tracking everything that you do, say, or give to somebody, emails, papers, also claims under BWC and OSHA. You're going to have a death claim and injury. What does that mean for you? The Bureau of Work Comp when you're filing. Let me see. Oh, we're almost there. So I tell people is, talking to your employees and communicating to them and making sure that you're in constant contact and talking back to restart funeral services or memorial services that you may have in your employment. Also, you have armchair quarterbacks. During my incident, there were people who thought they knew what happened and were going to tell me what happened in my facility, but you too will have that happen to you from a media standpoint. Where to start? I just tell people do something. Start with a tabletop exercise that moves to a functional exercise that moves to full scale. Use the people in your community, the police, the fire department. When you're running fire drills, do a workplace violence drill. Do it initially on paper. If you don't have a place to exercise that, then do a functional exercise where you practice a little bit and then do a full scale exercise maybe in a year, and practice, 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 no matter what you do. Get your community involved. Your county emergency manager has resources. There are a lot of private contractors out there who do threats assessments, use behavioral health resources, the Red Cross, lots of the city managers and state emergency managers, and then the police and fire, because they do this all the time. What else? I just tell people start somewhere, do something, have a conversation, and use some of the stuff that's inside this PowerPoint that you can use to get after that. Okay, so what about questions? I know I went through the last slides quickly.
No, this is great, Beth. So far, there's not been any questions in the chat, which I think reflects well on your presentation being so thorough. You've given us a lot to think about and a lot of great resources. I've got 2 questions. And again, if somebody does have a question in the chat, we'll take a look at it. But what's the employee behavior that is most often missed or underestimated that could lead to workplace violence?
Yeah, I would say oftentimes they're just a little angry or disgruntled in the workplace initially. They might, while they're working, may just say, hey, this really stinks. I don't like this job. My supervisor doesn't like me. Those are usually the first things that start with is the supervisor. There's an altercation or issue with the supervisor or a fellow employee where they may be passive aggressive with somebody. Those are things I tell people to look out for. And then also social media. You'd be surprised how much stuff is put in social media that you don't know about between employees until someone brings it to your attention. Does that make sense? They're just those little signals that you have with folks. And oftentimes people that are coming in later have to leave early, oftentimes because of some personal issue that they may not share with you.
Okay. We do have a question. Does the new castle law apply at work?
Oh, I don't know what that law is. Somebody refresh my memory. What is the castle law?
I think that is I believe it's the law where you can defend your home, your castle, if somebody attacks it. So does that, I guess, provide, I mean, if you're able to defend or like that, and you injure them, are you gonna get retaliated on, or do you get sued, those types of things? That's a good question.
That is a really good question. I tell people it probably depends, and that's where a lawyer becomes involved. But I would say, there's a lot of employers out there that you can't have weapons in the workplace. And when you violate that, I have a cover, conceal, carry. I do. I think you have to be very careful in that. I would say, that's where you have 911 and the police arrive. But you see lots of heroes out there, even for our own folks, right? People who wanted to save the day. It's a natural reaction for some folks. I think as long as you do that, where you're not, you just still have to be careful with it. But I would say I'm more now on the protection of myself and protection of other people. But I would say, you are going to be held to a certain standard if you get into altercation with somebody, even with a weapon that might be your own. And from a law enforcement standpoint, I would say I'd reach out to your local police departments and get clarity from them on their perceptions of what that looks like for you. But I know we have people do it every day. I mean, if you look at the Walmart incident, there were people that went and helped in El Paso trying to take down somebody and defend those folks. And there are people out there who have. I'm definitely more myself a little more protective. After this incident happened, we armed people in our facility. We did. After that, they're not armed, but we did arm people in our facility. There were 2 people always armed in our facility after this incident happened. Only the people in that facility knew who had arming, but the military allowed us to do that. But some corporations and legal people may not allow you to do that in the process.
Yeah.
Great question.
Really good question. Last one. What's the most creative action or improvement you have seen an employer take to strengthen their workplace violence preparedness and prevention?
I think it starts out with the policy and procedure, have something written down. And then the second thing I think is practicing an event as if it's happened, right? Go through what that looks like for you as an organization if you actually would have something like this happen. Practice tabletop exercise. Do it on the table first, because if you try and bite off too more than you chew, your people get frustrated and they're like, oh my gosh, this is just too much. Using your supervisors, getting your owners involved, getting those people who are above you in your HR, those company CEOs to really look at what does that look like for you if something like that would happen. Because I think we leave those folks out. They don't think that'll happen here or to you. And you'll be more prepared, I think, because you'll have those partners in the community involved with you to help you get to yes, who actually practice just this incident. I mean, the police are very good about coming in and helping employers now because it's happened so much. You just have to ask.
Yeah, that's a great challenge to reach out. I guess someone did mention that the castle law is only your home or your car.
Yes.
So it sounds like it does not apply at work.
Yeah, but I would say we know those people who carry all the time, and I think are going to try and be a savior, and that, and it's hard because they're going to do it either way because they're in a stressful environment, and they may be the people that fight at the end that you don't know about.
That's right.
I think it's just educating folks. Thank you for whoever did that.
Yeah, Beth, thank you so much. Let's everybody clap. Most people are virtually. I'll do it so you can hear it. Thanks. But just some fantastic information, gang. Solinchamber.com/slides. You can see that. Join us next month. We've got on Wednesday, April 14th, we're going to be hearing from Cleveland Clinic. We've got the focus is rehab medicine. So again, thanks everybody for joining us today. Appreciate that. Again, avail yourself the slides. Beth, thank you so much again. And everybody have a great, safe day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Beth.